don't know what just happened. I touched something by mistake. Oh, I touched the finish instead of the turn the camera around by mistake, which of course, because I wasn't totally paying attention. But I was just doing my dialogue, my semi-rant on sports and how all sports are thinking man's games. There isn't any sport that's a dummy game where people just show up and suddenly they're doing well in that sport. Jill is 13. She turned 13 this year. She's been riding since she's 6 years old. No, I take that back. She's been riding since she was 5 years old. I don't know where 6 came from. She's been riding since she's 5 years old. So she's been riding for 8 years. She's very comfortable on the horse. She fell off one time. She fell off once when she was around, I want to say 7, and that's because I used to not have a babysitter, anyone to watch my 3 younger children at the time, and they were, no, she must have been 6 when she fell off. She must have been 6 because my oldest was 7, I had a 7, 5, and a 3-year-old, and they were running around the farm. It's a big farm, but she was on her horse and they ran into this large barn. This very barn here, because we've been coming here since she was 5.5. We were at 2 other schools before this one. Yeah, 2 other schools before this one. There's a huge barn. They ran in through that back door or back space right there, chasing each other and playing. And when they ran in, they spooked Jill's horse, and she was on the horse just doing like a light trot. And then when they ran in screaming, they spooked her horse, and the horse jerked off in the total opposite, like a perpendicular direction. And she flew off of the horse. She had the wherewithal, however, to keep grasping the reins. So she flew off and was dragged by the horse while holding onto the reins. And then when the horse stopped running, she let go. So she was clever enough to do that. So she didn't break a bone. She didn't get trampled on, thank God, because she was only about 6 years old. But she did get really spooked. I almost beat the other kids. I told them they are never allowed to come into this barn again. I was so angry. They could have killed her. She could have flown off that horse and broken her neck. So I was so angry. I told them they were banned from coming into this barn again. And she was spooked for about 2 years after that. It was very difficult for her to gallop, to start cantering and to gallop with the horse, because she was afraid that something was going to happen. The horse was spooked. So, of course, we got her right back up on the horse after she had gotten dragged, but she's a quiet one, so she didn't really say anything. She wasn't crying, but she was kind of terrified for a bit after that, because it was shocking. Just all of a sudden everything was normal, and then boom, it just took off flying in the opposite directions. As big as horses are, they're big scaredy cats. They're easily scared, and it's a lot of, pun intended, horsepower underneath that saddle, so it can be quite scary for them. Anyways, I've been yapping about horses, which has nothing to do with GYN, of course. God, it's really super humid out here. It's crazy. So let's see. Yesterday I spoke about treatment for severe. That's my daughter Joy. She's walking her Yorkie. Treatment for severe pre-cancer changes: high-grade SIL, high-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion, severe dysplasia. So I spoke about treatment for that, and that's a cone biopsy, complete removal of the irregular abnormal cells that are present on the cervix, all pathology that one can see. And then that cone biopsy, which now pretty much 99% of the time is not what we call a cold knife cone biopsy. It's a LEAP, which is an electrical biopsy, not with a steel surgical blade. It's done with electricity and a very, very super thin wire called a tungsten wire, where we scoop out kind of like an ice cream scooper, but it's a wire. We scoop out or lop off in layers the irregular abnormal cells. So we're the only ones out here except for the one other guy who always comes out here, I think with his daughter. But she's older. She's like 20-something, 30-something. They're the only ones out here. We're the only ones here. He's usually here before us. We get here at 8, and we're the only ones here until around 8:30, 8:40. So, yeah, the cone biopsy or the LEAP is the treatment and the management for severe precancerous changes. Once the cone biopsy or the LEAP has been accomplished, the pathologist will give us a report. They'll either say that all of the pathology, all of the dysplasia was contained within the biopsy specimen, and that the edges or the margins of the cervical specimen are clear, free of disease, and then a little scraping or curettage is done after the LEAP, and they'll evaluate that curettage or the scraping from the upper inner cervical cells. They'll confirm usually that there is not any pathology in that upper cervical area, that it's normal. Then the patient's treated. She's back to normal. Now, of course, nowadays people are much more lax, but we used to do pap smears, perform pap smears every 3 months for 2 years, because 2 years is considered the danger zone for cervical dysplasia or precancer changes coming back. So that 2-year time frame is the danger zone. We don't do the PAPs every 3 months anymore. We do them every 6 months, and I have seen patients whose doctors just tell them to come back in a year. I'm not comfortable with that for 2 reasons. One, if you tell people to come back in a year, they're going to come back in 2 years, because a year doesn't sound very important. It doesn't sound very serious. If you tell them to come back in 6 months, you're going to get about a third of them who'll come back in a year. So I say every 6 months still, because one, it sounds more important. They understand that you're monitoring, and it reinforces the fact that you've cleared up their precancerous changes today. You haven't prevented anything for tomorrow, and it keeps it in the back of their mind that they have the virus, the high-risk strains of HPV, and that virus, its sole reason for being, its raison d'etre, is to make normal cells turn into precancerous abnormal cells. So it keeps it in the front of their mind that they are not cured, they're treated for the moment, and continued vigorous monitoring is recommended, because it can come back, and I have seen it come back within a year or 2 years for sure for people. I've had patients who have needed over the years cone biopsy 2 or 3 times, because they just keep going right back up to severe precancer. And I like to always ask her to reinforce the fact that they should take supplements to strengthen their immune system. Since we can't get rid of the virus, we can only get rid of the symptoms, and the symptoms are the precancerous changes. I always reinforce that they should take supplements to strengthen their immune system, because only the immune system can potentially suppress the virus, and it's suppression of the virus that's needed to prevent additional severe precancer changes. So when they come in every 6 months for that 2-year time frame, or over those 4 pap smears, I always ask what supplements they're taking for their immune system. And sometimes I'll get, oh, I stopped taking it, oh, I ran out and I never got a refill, or, well, how long do I have to take those supplements? And I'll say, you don't have to take them very long. You only need to take them as long as you want to prevent the virus from causing problems, right? Because that's the story. Or they go, do I have to take those for like ever and ever? And I say, no. Of course you don't have to take them forever and ever. It's a free country. You only need to take them for as long as you would like to suppress the virus and potentially prevent cervical precancer changes occurring. And they go, okay, so I guess that's a long time. Nope, it's only as long as you're comfortable trying to prevent cervical precancer. Very simple. So it's a way to reinforce the fact that we have not cured them of HPV, and they've gone and done this big full-on treatment. Phew, they're done. No, you're never done. If you have HPV, you should always be vigilant that the virus is suppressed and that it's not returning or it's not slowly causing irregularity unwittingly. So once the 2 years are up, at the end of that 2-year time frame, if that last pap is normal, then they're back in the pool with everyone else once a year. And the recommendation is for 5 years. If you've had any kind of precancerous or dysplastic changes, then you're supposed to be monitored once a year for 5 years. That's the latest, because the management changes every couple of years, honestly. So the latest and greatest management is 5 years. If you've had a problem, precancerous changes, your body's shown that it's not going to cooperate with you. It's your frenemy, not your friend. Hold on. Joy Gilafini. Just letting Joy know that it's her turn at the bat, so to speak. Jill's finishing her lesson. So Joy's my 9-year-old. My hot off the press 9-year-old. She turned 9 in May. She's really a joy. She's very sweet. So if you've had problems in the last 5 years, then you're supposed to continue doing the once per year PAP screening, because you've proven that you're susceptible to that you have the virus. You're susceptible to the virus. You've gone all the way up to precancer, mild or severe, doesn't matter. Then you should be monitored every year to see if it's come back. Not the virus, but to see if the changes have returned. Now, the latest recommendations by American College of OB-GYN is that once you've passed 5 years, if you haven't had any issues in 5 years, then you have the blessing of ACOG to not have to do the PAPs every year. You can do the PAPs every 2 to 3 years, and that's based on the fact that the studies are showing it takes on average for one or more of those high-risk strains of HPV, it takes on average 2 to 3 years for someone's cervix to go from normal over to cervical cancer. So people have the luxury now of not having to drag themselves in every year to do the PAP. They could do the PAP every 2 to 3 years. The irony to me is that we already know, and you guys know too, if you looked at any of the previous presentations on the PAP screening, that the PAP is a screening test. It has a miss rate. And if you don't do the viral culture with it, the miss rate is about 35 to 45%. So 35 to 45% of the time when people are told their PAP is normal, it's not actually normal. There's changes that weren't picked up. Either those abnormal cells never made it to the slide to be evaluated, or they made it and perhaps they weren't identified. If you add the viral culture and they agree, the PAP looks normal and the virus is negative, that increases your believability rate or reliability rate, subsequently decreases the false rate down to 5 to 15%. But there's still a 5 to 15% chance that when your report comes back normal, no precancer changes, it's not actually normal. It's abnormal. There are precancerous changes, and they either did not exfoliate, those cells did not make it to the slide to be evaluated, or they made it to the slide and they weren't identified. So maybe I'm a chicken, a scaredy cat, but me, even without having had a history of changes, but especially if I'd had a history of having severe precancer changes or even just mild precancer changes, I would do the PAP every year because you have nothing to lose, only to gain. But the research saying that even if someone has changes and they're mild, of course there's a high possibility they will go away on their own. They don't need to be treated, they just need to be loosely monitored. So everyone is supposed to do their own due diligence and decide. Well, the sun's starting to come out. It was overcast earlier, but I guess the sun is burning it off. They're supposed to do their own due diligence and evaluate their own situation, decide whether they're comfortable or not comfortable with PAP screening frequency, whether they're comfortable with doing the screening once a year, every 2 years, every 3 years. I mean, you get some of these world experts are saying, hey, we're going to have still a small rate of cancer of the cervix if we even go to every 5 years. So for them, if someone hasn't had issues in the last 5 years, they're recommending that women go not every year, not every 2 to 3 years, but that they go every 5 years for screening, which I think is wrong. It's not about, I mean, when they make recommendations like that, these are public health recommendations, so they're not making these recommendations to improve the health status for any given individual. They're making these recommendations based on the risk and benefits and finances. So, society is spending a lot more money when you decide to check people every year or every 2 to 3 years versus checking women every 5 years. PAPs are pretty cheap. I know for the patients who come in, they don't have insurance, they're paying cash. The lab we use for cash patients charges them Medicaid rates, so they pay like $40 for a PAP, and it might even be going down to $30 pretty soon. So the PAPs are relatively cheap. Sorry. If you are paying out of pocket and you write like a hardship letter, it's like 2 sentences. I can't afford to pay over $100, and they'll give you a discount. It's very easy. But in general, if you multiply $30 or $40 for 30 million women, that adds up, right? That's millions upon millions of dollars. And if they can cut corners and save anywhere, they're going to do that. So not everyone's going to have an issue every year, so don't do them every year. But to extend it to every 3, 4, or 5 years, it doesn't sound important. And once you start doing that oftentimes, you're gonna, obviously you're compounding, so your miss rate is increasing because you're only checking every 3 to 5 years. So if you have even if you do the virus, if you have a 10 or 15% miss rate, that's times 5, right? So now that miss rate is over 50%. And then every time you do it, which is every 5 years, you have a 50% miss rate. You can imagine how that you do the PAP. So you're doing a whole exam, and then they're skipping the PAP, which seems kind of silly to me. But maybe I'm old school, maybe I'm a scaredy cat, who knows, but that's what's being recommended. So that's my rant on the whole PAP screening. I hope this whole series of information has been helpful from start to beginning, from PAP to